Dr. Adams. I'm excited for this presentation on the not Major League Baseball plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I do appreciate you all taking the time to allow us to present. We are very excited about some of the findings that we had today. Ms. Lautner will be co-presenting with me on the survey. I know there were some questions, and she's going to bring some information on how those surveys were weighted and provide some additional context. I also like to recognize Reverend Dr. Butler for his work. He's been an intricate part of this work. We've been working on this for the past 2 years, and I do appreciate your support, your patience, and your involvement along the way. So greatly appreciate the work that you have done working within your community and certainly working with my team. And so I do want to recognize Reverend Butler. So how did we get here? So in 2022, the city of Knoxville received a HUD grant for $40 million. That projected 400 additional students within that area. In 2023, Knox County Schools developed a Region 5 strategic plan within that area. Now, again, I do want to recognize Reverend Butler's work with the strategic plan, but also roughly 250 plus community members in collaboration with Knox County Schools really worked together to come up with that plan. And some of the things that we'll point out in tonight's presentation that are included in that strategic plan are the added preschool space and more academic opportunities for students. In 2024, thanks to our distinguished school board, we approved $66 million for the Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and Beaumont solution. And I do want to recognize that those are all unique communities. And so when we talk about Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and Beaumont, I want to be clear that that is the area, right? So they're very unique communities within those schools. And so that is the area that we are focusing on. So again, Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and Beaumont, what schools are we discussing? You have the Beaumont Magnet Academy, you have Maynard Elementary, you have Lonsdale Elementary, and you have Westview Elementary. I would like to recognize that community and their work as they came out to many community meetings. We had a total of 8 community meetings. We had a great turnout, and we had great dialogue, and they shared a lot of information. We had every principal attending those meetings. As a matter of fact, they attended multiple meetings, and so there was a lot of support for their colleagues as well. We also had faculty and staff that attended those meetings, so we received tons of input from our faculty and staff. So greatly appreciate the input that we received. Also, the community, again, Ms. Lautner will go over that, shared some information with the survey. So that is very important as we go through this process. It's a little different. Those of you know, I'm a former high school and middle school principal, but I'm also a special education director, and the size is comparable to Knox County Schools. And so the work that we do is very unique to how school operates, and you can't do that without input from communities, right? And so moving forward, this is a process. Again, we did it, as Dr. Rice recognized, in the town of Farragut, and we're going to continue to do that work as we move forward and looking at solutions within communities. So I do want to draw your eyes to this slide here. This is the Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and Beaumont feeder pattern. This is not an ideal feeder pattern. What you're looking at, 4 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, and 4 high schools. And so when you think about transitioning from elementary to middle to high, you always think about age-appropriate peers, right? And so as they move to their prospective schools, Beaumont is a prime example. They're feeding it to several middle schools, and they're feeding it to several high schools. That is something that as we look at building new schools and we look at zoning in that area, we like to clean up those feeder patterns. So we like to keep students within their communities so they can attend school with their age-appropriate peers when we can do so. So that is ideal, and moving forward, that will be our focus. So the challenges in the MLB area. So one, we had the anticipated growth from the Transforming Western project. I do want you also to keep in mind, even though those 4 additional students are already accounted for, that the work that they are doing with that HUD grant, this does not account for any additional or new development. It is anticipated that you will have much more additional development in that area as that project takes off. You also have limited programmatic opportunities and wraparound student support. So when you talk about programs, programming, and again, this is me speaking from a principal's perspective. When you talk about programming, the larger your school is, it gives your principal more options, which gives more students options. Also, the more students you have, the more teachers you have. So it gives a lot of flexibility within your schedule, but it also gives you additional teachers to where you can do unique things. So you talk about their tutoring and resources, just an example of that. You can get real granular in your schedule to provide additional supports for students, whether that's enrichment or whether that's an intervention, right? And so that's where you have unique STEM programs, arts, and so forth. Also, when you look at a smaller school, you end up sharing resources. So when you think about our greatest resource or asset, it's a teacher, right? Or those support systems. And so a lot of these schools that are smaller schools share counselors, they share social workers, and they share encore teachers. And I do want to touch base on the last one. And again, speaking from my experience as a special education director in a large district, what that looks like, and this is not unique to Knox County schools, you end up, maybe because the school does not have the ADA capabilities within the building, you end up transporting students outside of their community to a neighboring school. And that is something that we certainly want to focus on and get away from as we build new schools. We want to ensure that those students have those supports. Again, that's near and dear to my heart. So when you build new facilities, you want to ensure that you have state-of-the-art facilities to ensure that they're ADA accessible and the programs are there for those unique needs. Limited preschool space. The district has done an exceptional job of focusing on the pre-K programs and catching those students early. And so again, that is something that we want to continue to focus on and build that program. And again, just the facts, we currently do not have a middle school in that community or in those communities. So why new construction? Well, it adds capacity. Again, we talk about enrollment. We want larger schools to ensure that we have the adequate resources we need in teachers and programming. The space on the existing MLB campuses now, we're landlocked. I mean, just to be blunt about it. And what ends up happening is you have to disrupt the learning environment. So we have to get what you call a certificate of occupancy. So they have to clear us to say that students can occupy those spaces. When you have construction on existing or older buildings, you disrupt a lot of things, anywhere from foundation to the ceilings, to sprinklers, to fire alarm systems. There are a lot of things that you have to invest in and upgrade as you're trying to conduct school and run school. And again, make sure we want to ensure that it's ADA accessible for existing students or students to come. So all of those things become problematic when you look at building or doing additions or any type of renovation on an existing school. And again, it's a better use of dollars, right? So we look at maximizing student opportunities, maximizing or enhancing learning when you can look at state-of-the-art facilities and allocating those dollars to ensuring that those students get the programs that they need. So I will let Ms. Lautner jump in. I'll give her a tag out here in a second. I'll tag back in. Thank you.
Tag, thanks. All right, so I will be brief, but before Dr. Adams dives into our proposal for that MLB area, we want to take just a quick step back and reflect on our approach, our strategy as a district when it comes to planning for these major capital investments, because we know that this is a major capital investment. As you know, we're a vast system. Knox County Schools is a large district. We have 5 regions. We have about 60,000 students. Those of you who have been with us for a while know that we're also seeing significant shifts in our student population. We have schools that are experiencing significant increases in student enrollment. We also have schools that are experiencing decreases in student enrollment. And so with a finite or with a limited budget for capital improvements, and that's exactly what we have, it is limited, we need to take all of that into consideration when we are making these investments. And so you heard from Dr. Reiswick earlier, and I thought this was incredibly well put, that this is a very rare opportunity. We don't often have $66 million to invest in any community. And so when we have that opportunity, we have to be strategic with how we allocate those resources and how we plan for the future. Those of you who are with us with the Farragut Schools solution know that as we walked through that development process, it became very, very clear that that traditional approach, that idea of building a replacement school, was no longer sustainable. It wasn't enough to meet the needs of, let alone one community, but the entirety of our district. And so as we plan for these dollars, we have to think holistically, but we also have to be very future focused. And for us, that looks like what you have on the screen here. It looks like taking a whole community approach to strategic planning and really thinking about these three domains in everything that we do. And as we're making decisions, keeping in mind best practices, programmatic needs, as well as community input. And so what do we mean by that? When we're talking about best practices, we're really talking about those research-based, those evidence-based practices that would be true for any kid in any community. This is just what staff know to be true, either anecdotally or from research, that is best for kids. That's a lot of those infrastructural decisions, the capacity decisions that are made, the staffing decisions that are made, that have to be taken into consideration when we are making a large-scale investment in a community. When we're talking about programmatic needs, we're talking about needs that could be a little bit more community specific. So that's looking at, in a given community, in this scenario, in the MLB area, what's missing that we want kids to have access to, what's present that we want to scale and ensure more kids have access to, what's working, what's not, and how are we planning to ensure that students have those specialized services, those wraparound supports that they need and that they deserve to be successful in their academic journey. So all of that is boiled down to the programmatic needs that we're keeping in mind as we're developing a proposal and a recommendation to make to the board. And finally, community input. You heard from Dr. Adams, you heard from Dr. Reiswick that this is something we take very seriously. Engaging the community that lives in the academic environment, is familiar with the academic environment, in that conversation to dream with us a little bit. What do you want the academic space to look like? What programmatic needs are you seeing, so that we're making a decision that is informed and is staked in kind of the reality that the community has articulated to us. So as I say all of that, something that I'm reminded by, and you heard it from Dr. Reiswick earlier today, I've heard it from Dr. Adams many, many times, is that when you make an investment of this scale, you're really making a generations-long investment, right? It will outlive all of us. And so we want to keep that in mind. We want to keep these three components in mind so that we are grounded in a very future-focused decision-making mentality as we go into that proposal. And so, again, this is our commitment to whole community solutions, a little bit of what it looks like and why we're going to anchor everything we talk about today in best practices, programmatic needs, and community input. Specifically, we're going to talk about some of the key considerations that we weighed in each of these domains over the course of that planning and development process. I'm going to begin with community input. And what I'll say, again, just as we think about community input, is that this is really that opportunity for us to dream a little bit as a community, for us to assess what matters, what values the community has as it relates to that academic environment and to programmatic opportunities for students. Something that we know for a fact anytime we go out and we do this work is that there's always a possibility that we're engaging participants in a community survey, or we're engaging participants in a community meeting that may not actually wind up with a new school. But what we do want is for that whole community approach to yield a net positive impact for every participant. And so that's why we ask folks to dream with us a little bit. What do you like? What's important to you? What do you value as it relates to that academic ecosystem? And so for us, as we think about the MLB project, the community input process really was multimodal. It was two-phase. We began with a community survey, and we followed that with some community meetings. And here's what we learned. The community survey, we had a pretty good response rate, just shy of 300 respondents. We did send that survey out both electronically and on paper, just trying to reach as many folks as possible. The survey itself was provided in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Kirundi. You can see the breakdown in school affiliation from our respondents. And I do want to talk just a moment about the methodology that we used. I know that there have been some questions about that, and this is something that we were really excited to be able to take on. Usually when you take a survey, it's click one option, vote, and you get one choice for one option. And we know that when we're considering big decisions, it's a lot to boil that down to one choice, one vote, one option, right? And so what we really wanted to do was ask folks two very insightful questions, incisive questions, and I'll share those with you in just a moment, and then let them rate their priorities, what mattered most to them. And so every respondent was given a series of options and asked to rank those from most important to second most important to third most important to fourth most important. Each of those options received a favorability score that really just helped us boil down kind of what mattered most to the community at large. And so what you'll see is how those surveys shook out. So on the survey, the very first question we asked was, when you think about education in your community, which of the following options do you feel is most important? Survey respondents had, let me remind myself how many are here, 7 options to choose from on this question. And you can see from the red bar that the most favored, the most important factor for the community at large was maintaining a supportive learning environment for all students. That's in the red bar there. The second tier of responses are in blue. So these are those 3 factors that didn't elevate to the rate of being the most highly rated response, but were very important to the community at large. And that was increasing the number of advanced academic options for students, keeping the number of students at schools in the community as low as possible, and having more options for middle schoolers to attend a school closer to their neighborhood. Something that I will note, because you do see this sometimes when you're working with a ranked choice survey, occasionally you get an option that has a 0 value. If nobody rates a factor, an option, as being one of the 4 most important options, it would appear as a 0 here, and you can see that wasn't the case. So someone, a lot of someone's actually, felt that any number of these factors was important to them, did shake out as being one of their top 4 most important factors, most important considerations. And so what that tells us is that at the end of the day, it's all important and it all matters. But you can see kind of where that significance rate sort of shakes out and what was most important to the community at large here. For the second question, same process. The question was, when you think about opportunities you want students to have access to, which of the following options do you think are most important? So here, it's a little bit closer between your first and second most favored options, but the first option here, the most highly rated option, was expanded STEM programming. So that's that science, technology, engineering, and math programming, followed very closely thereafter by expanded arts programming, music, dance, etc. And then you also see the next 2 most highly rated factors were more advanced academic programming for middle school students, followed by, or actually preceded by, more advanced programming for middle school or elementary school students. And again, this is another one that every single one of these factors was rated as being most important, second most important, third most important, fourth most important by a combination of the participants. So those 3 factors on the left there may not have risen to the level of importance as the factors on the right, but they were rated as important by some members of the community. And so we take all of that into account when we're planning and when we're devising the proposal that you'll hear in just a moment. So the second phase of the community input process was those community meetings. You've already heard a little bit about those from Dr. Adams. We did have 8 community meetings. We were able to convene a morning session and an evening session at each of the 4 elementary schools in the area, just to give folks as much opportunity as possible to come out and be engaged in the process. We did facilitate those meetings in 4 languages. I want to give a huge shout out to the Welcome Center and our family and community liaisons. This was a large undertaking for them, but very much a worthwhile one to be able to facilitate those community sessions in English, Spanish, Kirundi, and Akateco. We did have a little over 145 participants all told, so a great participant rate from the community at large. And in addition to hearing from Dr. Adams, some high-level feedback from the surveys and some next steps and sort of what we were thinking as a district, we did ask every participant to give us one more round of feedback, and we asked that they engage in kind of an exit ticket on the way out the door. Every participant was given 2 sticky dots that they could spend any way that they wanted. So we asked participants to consider six more factors, and let us know what was important to them. Again, just really capturing the value within the community that we needed to keep in mind as we developed this proposal and this plan. So you can see here we've got the 6 factors on the screen. The 2 most important, most highly rated factors within the community were, number 1, increasing options for tutoring, recess schedules, encore programming, etc. And I'll say this, participants could sticky any of these posters with both of their dots, so they could spend both of their dots in one place if that was the most important factor to them. If they wanted to split up their dots, they could spend one dot on one poster and spend another dot on another poster. We did have these translated into all 4 of the languages that were present. You can see the picture of the 2 English posters for the 2 most highly rated factors here. The second most highly rated factor was proximity of my zone school to my house. So how close is my school to where I currently live? And then you see the other 4 factors on the side in order of their rating of importance. Number 3 was having space for a dedicated preschool in the community. Number 4 was reducing the number of transitions between schools. Number 5 was keeping in mind walkability to and from school, and number 6 was availability of bus transportation for students. And so that's just how that last round of feedback shook out in the community meetings. And I will take a deep breath and I will pause right now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Adams to tell us a little bit about what that means for the options on the table.
Thank you, Ms. Lautner. So looking at the options for the new construction options for the MLB community feedback, I do want to draw your attention to a couple of things here. One, where you see the asterisks, that means that these options are aligned directly with the Region 5 strategic plan. What you see highlighted in red, and it's important that I mention this because you will not see the same thing on the other slide. These are areas where the community said that these areas are most important to them, right? And so when you look at those areas, the first one's add middle school capacity, supportive learning environment for all students, again, aligned with the strategic plan, Region 5 strategic plan, increased advanced academic offerings for elementary school students, aligned with the strategic plan, increased advanced academic offerings for middle school students, aligned with the Region 5 strategic plan. You have expanded arts program. You have expanded STEM program, again, which is aligned to the strategic plan. And then you have low student numbers at all schools. The bottom 2 categories, again, to Ms. Lautner's point, these are the areas of where the community said were most important. So increasing options for tutoring, recess schedules, encore programming, et cetera, and proximity of my zone school to my house. Now, each one of these areas, we looked at what do 3 different options look like. And again, just very similar to the Farragut solution, we want to look at multiple options, right? And we want to see what gives our students the best opportunity to access learning. And so as you can see, with the areas that we identified with the new elementary schools, the areas it does not give you. And if you look at the new middle school, you can see where there are 2 areas which you do not have that. And then you look at the middle school, you have low student numbers at all schools. And this was something that we addressed with the community. I don't know how much the public knows that the more students you have, the more access you have to teachers and the more access you have to programming. So that was discussed in length at a lot of our meetings and addressed with the community. So that is an area when we do look at building new schools, one of the things that we don't want to do is, unless the circumstances say that is best for students, when you look at small schools and you look at less teachers and you look at less programs, right? And so we really want to give our students the best opportunities to access learning. The other area was proximity of my zone school to my house. And so you look at the middle school area, like in the community that's closer. In the elementary school, remember there's areas of the Lonsdale community. It's a very small area, and we did address that. And what's interesting is as soon as we said that in the Lonsdale meeting, they said, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. So there's an area that they know that is on the outskirts of Lonsdale. So that would be the area that we would provide transportation from Knox County schools. And so our programmatic needs, when you look at programmatic needs, this is really focusing on those areas we talked about: special education, ELL, tutoring, STEM, advanced arts, and so forth. So identified programmatic needs in the MLB area. We want more preschool space. We want a middle school program in the community. That's something that we currently do not have. We want innovative programming. Again, we talk about advanced academic STEM in the arts. Increased on-site special education services. Again, we do have multiple specialized special education programs. And anytime we look at doing a renovation or an addition or new construction, that is an area of focus. We want to ensure that we have those programs within the community, and also enhanced ELL programs. So again, these are the areas that we flagged as far as identified program needs in the Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and Beaumont area. So this is the new construction option for programmatic needs. Now, this is a little different when you're looking at, these are best practices, right? So you're probably looking at, why is this in black? Well, that is, again, you've had the asterisks for the Region 5 strategic plan. The areas in black are best practices, but this was not highlighted as a community priority per se. Now, I will say, when you look at surveys, normally when you look at that data, you will normally find something down in the 0 area or very few input as far as a need. What we did see is there was a need across the board. So every one of those categories were very important to the community. So add middle school capacity. Again, that was one of the priorities for the community. Add preschool capacity, that is identified in the Region 5 strategic plan. Increased advanced academic offerings for elementary school students, that is identified in the strategic plan, and that is an area that the community felt was a need, or the communities, excuse me. Increased advanced academic offerings for middle school students, again, identified in the Region 5 strategic plan, and an area that the communities felt was important. Increased on-site special education services, again, best practices. Enhanced ELL programming, best practices. Expanded arts programming, this is an area that was flagged as an area of need and importance to the community. And expanded STEM programs, this is something that is aligned with the Region 5 strategic plan, also very important to the community. Again, if you look at all of those areas, you can see in this particular area, the K-8 school is an option that checks all the boxes, right? If you look at the new middle school, of course, it does not address the concerns for a preschool, and it also does not address the concerns for increased academic opportunities for elementary. If you look at elementary, it does not identify the need for a middle school, and it also does not identify the need for advanced academic areas for middle school students. Okay, so this goes back to our best practices. And so our best practices are relative to the MLB community or solution. We want to reduce the number of transitions between schools. I know Ms. Lautner had worked on some research last year when we looked at transitions, and this is when we went from a primary to 3 elementary schools. And what we realized from the community is that was a need. And research shows that multiple transitions cause learning loss, right? That is research-based. Also increasing flexibility for scheduling. So you look at tutoring, encore classes, and so forth. I will just give you an example. I had a high needs middle school at one point, and we needed intervention. And so RTI had just came out, I don't know, it was probably a little over a decade ago, and I pulled a teacher out of the classroom, and she was my RTI coordinator. I was fortunate because she was a former principal. Now, I was able to do that because I had a large middle school, and I had flexibility within my schedule. So that does give you the flexibility, the principal, and the region directors to really work with the principal on schedulings and really be intentional about our students. Adding capacity for preschool programming, again, that is a focus for the district. Increasing student enrollment to provide a more full-time staff to support. Again, we talk about the shared resources when you talk about counselors, you talk about social workers, when you talk about small schools, when you have one administrator, it makes it very difficult, right? And we want to ensure that our students have the resources available to them to meet their needs. Maintaining a supportive learning environment for all students. This is something that we all can agree on. And what gets us there? What does that look like? How do we provide all of those opportunities for those students? So Again, we want to talk about best practices and going back to what was highlighted in some of the surveys. We had, again, the asterisk is aligned to Region 5 strategic plan. You had add preschool space, supportive learning environment for all students. It is identified in the Region 5 strategic plan, but it's also highlighted in what the community said was importance to them. Reduce transitions between schools, again, research-based best practices. Increasing options for tutoring, resource, scheduling, encore, and programming. Again, we talked about what that looks like within a school and a community. How do you get those resources? Again, that was an area of importance for the community. Increasing student enrollment to provide more staff and for students, teachers, administrators, and so forth. And so, again, when you look at the options that you have, the new elementary school and the new middle school does not check all of the boxes, but when you look at a new K-8, that does give you the additional supports that you need within that school. So, before we go into the proposal, I did say to the board that we would bring back land identification. And so when we talk about the MLB solution and looking at property, again, this has been a 2-year search, right? And anytime we start talking about a new school, we start researching what land is available. And so if you look at Site A, you had some environmental issues there. And if you look at Site B, it's 8.7 million, and the available acreage is only 16 acres. And if you look in that area, you know, it's tight, right? When you get into the center city, it's really tight. And so the cost of land it goes up significantly. You look at Site C, it's unavailable. It's one of those that we looked at, but it was not for sale, right? And so we work with partners. We work with Knox County government. We also work with the city of Knoxville when we look to identify land, and we work with additional partners to look at these properties and really reach out to see if they're even available. And Site D, it was last purchased for $8.5 million. Again, you're looking at demolition costs. You're also looking at a facility currently on that site for lease, and that really pushes out your timeline if it's even available. So we landed on was the rural site. And again, we have been working very closely with the city of Knoxville and Knox County government trying to find a site. And I will tell you, when you look at considerations, historical significance, I will tell you, I started teaching over 20 years ago with that man right there, Dr. Brown, and we started at Central High School. And if I had a quarter for every rural high school story that I heard, I would be a multi-billionaire. And so it is a historical site of significance. And so that was definitely a site that we felt very strongly would meet the needs of the community as far as proximity, as far as historical significance. So we were very excited to work with Knox County government. And again, this is the site that we have identified. We will come back before the board, and I'll get into that. With the proposal. So the MLB solution proposal, again, going back to what Ms. Lautner had talked about, when we look at this, when we look at our strategy, our planning, we factor in all of these things, best practices, programmatic needs, and community input. That is the process that we have done to make a well-informed decision. So this is what it would look like on the rural site, and what we're looking at is a K-8 school. It would serve approximately 1,000 elementary school students. It would serve approximately 600 middle school students. Excuse me. What I would like to say, this is programmatic capacity. We currently have a committee that's really looking at what does programming look like within every building. This gives us a unique opportunity to look at a building and say, how do we build it out as far as programming, right? We have a committee that's what their focus is on. And so we can be very intentional on programming, but that gives us room as far as capacity. But it also looks at, when you talk about 1,600 total students, you're looking at, that's not what the building holds, that's just for programming, right? So the Westview Elementary School would be converted into a dedicated preschool. I will say we looked at all 3 schools, and that was certainly the best option for various reasons. So Westview would be converted into a pre-K program. Then we would be looking at a land swap, and that would be Beaumont Magnet Academy and Maynard Elementary with Knox County government. So an innovative K-8 and dedicated preschools will address anticipated enrollment increases, as we talked about the Western Heights, the Western Project, Transformation Western, they've changed it. When you look at the additional enrollment, 400 additional students, again, we do highly anticipate that that area will continue to grow with development. Add preschool and elementary and middle school capacity in the community. K-8 will provide the space, a standalone space for our pre-K program, something that we are investing in. It would also give us a state-of-the-art building that would serve students with elementary and our middle school students. It would reduce the number of transitions between schools. Again, we talked about the multiple transitions and why that can be problematic for student learning. And we talked about increased opportunities for innovative programming, flexibilities with your programs. The larger your schools are as far as your student population, the more opportunities you have for programming and additional teachers. We talked about increased options for tutoring, recess schedules, encore programming, et cetera. Think about enrichment, think about intervention, think about advanced academics, think about your arts programs. It gives you that opportunity and that flexibility within your schedule. Provide more students and teachers with more full-time support staff. Again, when you look at some of our smaller schools, they share those administrators, counselors, social workers, et cetera. So this gives you an opportunity to have support staff and teachers in your building 5 days a week. So the path to a new school. So April 2024, thanks to our board, we approved $66 million in our 5-year capital plan. On December 2024, we had the community engagement meetings. And again, very appreciative of the communities coming out and sharing their thoughts and giving their input. I can tell you it was very beneficial for myself and my team and all of the teams within Knox County Schools that have really dove into this work and really tried to get a good feel of what the communities need. And so today this is the proposal. And so we will come back before the board on March 2025 as far as land acquisition. That is a MOU that we will be working out with Knox County government. And then we'll move into the building and design. And so that goes before the board. That goes out for bid. It takes a calendar year, right? So when you look at the design of a new school, it does take a year. And so that's why it kicks it into 2026 to 2028 when construction would begin. Questions?
Ms. Pike.
Sorry, I said I wasn't going to have questions, but I do. You're surprised, I know. Thank you so much for giving this presentation and to your teams and everything. I really appreciate this, and I know that this is in my district, but I do have a few questions, and I'll try to be quick about it. And because there aren't page numbers, I'm going to show you where. So this one, the community survey one, where it kind of lists out school affiliation, for the ranked choice survey, I was curious if I could potentially get a number of how many transfer students we have at each of those schools. I'd be really interested to know that. And then I was curious if in some of the surveys, if you asked whether the family was a transfer or not, or whether it was their zoned school.
Ms. Pike, thank you so much. We did not ask whether or not the respondents were there on transfer, but we can get you the number of transfer students for sure.
Okay. But obviously, definitely parents of students in those schools, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you received the survey one of two ways. You were either a resident within the schools that, within the zone of the 4 elementary schools. So regardless of whether you had an elementary school student, middle school student, or high school student, if you lived within one of those 4 school zones, you received this survey. Or if you had a student who is currently enrolled at one of those schools. So that would have included students there on transfer as well.
Okay, cool. Next question. So I see all the programming. This looks really wonderful. I know that this is what a lot of the families are asking for, but I was curious if this would be deemed a magnet school.
So I will kick that question to our Assistant Superintendent of Academics. I will say, when we do plan for a new school, the programming piece comes later on, right? Because number one, you have to bring a new principal on board, and then you start that process as far as staffing, and then you start the process as programming. And so Dr. Wilson can probably speak to it better than I can as they plan for that.
Well, I'll start by just tacking on to his answer. I think it's rather early in the process to say yes or no to that question. What I will say is, I think that obviously there is a lot of experience with the magnet in this community, in these communities, and interest in kind of the future of that. And I would say that we look at lots of different ways when we're thinking of academic programming to provide innovative opportunities and choices for families. And those are programs in this community that have been successful over time, and we're not really in the habit of trying to do away with things that we think work well. And so we certainly will be looking at that. I think if you look at the survey information provided there's a lot of nod towards things like arts, things like STEM, certainly advanced academics. I think when I think of elementary level and advanced academics, that line between the performing arts and STEM and things like that sort of gets a little blurrier. But again, we hear that loud and clear, and I think that we've seen a lot of success over time, and so those are all things we take into consideration as we move forward. And so if we move forward with this, I assume that a playground and that equipment would be included?
That is correct.
Okay. And on that, because I know Beaumont has a really nice little stage that they have and stuff like that for some of their programming. Is that something that would also be considered in a playground type of setting?
So currently, what we do when we build new schools, we have a standard playground. So that is something that we may take in consideration in years out. Because this is a unique situation. But again, working with our partners, currently we have a standard playground option for that. So that is something that we could take into consideration.
Okay. And then since we know that certainly for the magnet program we have transfers, in this planning, do you plan to have like a certain number of transfers, or how? I know that I'm like getting ahead of all of this, but I'm just curious if you've thought about any of that and how that would work.
We did, and what I will tell you is when you look at programmatic capacity and capacity in general, the numbers that we currently have were included in our numbers.
Okay. And then my last question is the site, the rural high campus. I get that it's a land swap, like that's really great, historical significance, but if that is an already standing building, do we know what the estimate for renovation is?
So the Knox County government, they did the majority of demolition on that site. So they've already cleaned up, they've done the majority. As a matter of fact, this is probably the most cost-effective site that I've seen in my 3 years back in Knox County schools. So that is not a concern that we have.
Okay, so what is currently there, like you feel there's not anything we're going to have to go back and do? Like,
that is a great question. So I will tell you, we do have a maintenance facility that's currently there. So we would have to relocate our maintenance facility.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Mike.
Ms. Christie?
Thank you. So I just have a couple of comments and a question. We've heard, and I want to just put this out there because I know people have signed up for public forum to speak about this. And I've heard, I've seen online, and I know we have gotten emails from people concerned or that would prefer to have a middle school instead of a K-8. I want to be clear that I want to be supportive of the first district and Dr. Butler, but I do not feel like Knox County Schools is currently in a position where we can give people things because they would prefer to have them over things we need. Right now we are out of room in South Knoxville. I mean, we are. And, when I get emails from people saying that they want us to reject this and send it back to start over, then South Knoxville doesn't have time for that. So I want to make that clear. I can support a K-8 school. I have no problem with that. We've been talking about this a long time. But when we talk about doing things just based on what we want to have, you know, I'm just going to tell you all, I don't know how Planning Commission comes up with the numbers they come up with, but all of our districts are really struggling, I think, to keep up with capacity right now. You know, I had 8 new students pick up forms to enroll in a school that's already full today in South Knoxville. So I do want to be clear that, you know, I personally cannot consider a middle school if the enrollment numbers do not support that. I can support the K-8. And also, my question is, I know that we have not built a K-8, or at least not in decades, right? Do we feel comfortable that this project can be completed for the $66 million that the board has approved for it?
Thank you, Ms. Christie. So what I will tell you is construction is a moving target. So yes, when we went before the board and we looked at what we needed for a new school, we anticipated land being extremely expensive within that area. Now, with the land swap that we have and the cushion we gave within the budget, we do feel confident, unless, again, construction is a moving target, that we can build a K-8 for $66 million unless inflation hits us, right? I also say that, you know, we go back to Dr. Reiswick always says, we're going to do the hard work, right? And it would be very easy for us to build an elementary school. But looking at the needs within that community, we really thought outside of the box of what the community said they needed and what best practices said that our students deserve, right? And so if we didn't feel like we could build a K-8, then we wouldn't come to the board with that proposal. So the current numbers that we have, we can build a K-8 for $66 million. But again, that may be adjusted from within a year or two. But currently, the numbers that we have does support that. Thank you, Ms. Christie.
Ms. Templeton.
Sure. First,
There's a lot of
thank you.
lights
What?
I was saying there's a lot of lights on. Sorry for that pause.
It's blinding. Thank you. Thank you for talking to the community. Thank you for doing the hard work. Reverend Butler, thank you for being such an integral part of the decision-making to put together a tremendous win for this community. After talking to a lot of constituents over the weekend and last week and fielding emails as well, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. There have been some concerns, and I've had some really productive conversations with people from both inside my district as well as outside my district because, full disclosure, I think you all know, I have a child that attends Beaumont, and I've been walking through those halls for 8 years now. And so that school itself is near and dear to me. So I understand what this feels like. I do understand that for a piece of the community, there's a little bit of a loss. I know that my 8th grader will not do a graduation clap out through the halls of Beaumont, but I do recognize that this is a tremendous win for the community that it's going to serve, and I applaud you guys for the work that you've done. It's appreciated, and I want you to hear that because I've heard a lot of feedback that the K-8 solution can really be a community builder and can really create an atmosphere of inclusivity that is tremendous. But there are a couple of things. I did have a couple of questions, of course. You did ask Ms. Bike about the transfers. I wanted to make sure that we had kind of on record that those that were enrolled in Beaumont as transferred, because it's about 50-50 in that school, which frankly is attributed to the success of Beaumont as a magnet school. And that's something that is important to note, that Beaumont itself is the second to STEM and career magnet but the most sought after transfer in Knox County schools. I think it's important to note that because it is a magnet school, there are spaces allotted for those transfers. And what that means is that families have a choice of where their kids are going to go to school. And I feel like it's very much a win-win with the magnet schools, that we have those spaces set aside, which allows for socioeconomic diversity, that then allows for the success of the overall school and the growth. Because as someone who was once a PTA president at Beaumont, I can speak to being arm in arm with the community and being able to work with them and help parents who can't always come to the PTA meetings, but we can talk about what's happening there at school pickup. And understanding that not everybody can make it to a foundation meeting or we just got a foundation like 2 years ago. And so when we talk about economic disparities between schools, magnet schools help bridge that gap. And I would very much, while I understand too that the programmatic piece of this will come later and will be up for conversation, I do recommend that we think about the vision of this school and what the goal of this school will be, because the location rule high school was on. If you guys have a moment to go up there, it has the most stunning views of the city. Truly. And I remember I was telling, this is totally anecdotal, so I'm just going to waste your time for a second, but I dropped my daughter off for kindergarten, and I grew up in Miami. I sent my child to Beaumont because I was looking for the diversity that Beaumont provided. That was the reason why we went there. And I dropped her off. I was all excited, and I'm like, I'm just going to drive around. And I went up, and it is Virginia, and I went up to Virginia and went up through Western Heights, and the sun was rising, and you guys, it is beautiful up there. And I want these children to be able to see that sunrise, welcome them in the morning. I think that they deserve it. And I want the school to be successful. And speaking to Keith's comments earlier about attaching the lessons that were positive to this transition. What have we learned? There are things about Rule that we learned that we don't want to replicate. And there are things about Maynard that we do, and about Beaumont that we do want to replicate. And a piece of that is the magnet school, and specifically that allocation of seats for the transfer students. Because I'll say it again, it provides that parent choice to be able to choose where their kids will get the best education, and also in the same vein provide the parent support that the school will continue to need to be successful. So I will propose something that I'm not sure has ever been proposed before, but I would like this board to consider voting to establish this K-8 as an arts integrated magnet school. I think it's important to denote that on the front end, if at all possible, and that's something that I would very much support.
Thank you. Ms. Fontenot-Ridley.
So many non-connected questions that I have. Thank you for the presentation. It really did work out a few of the questions that I had. One of the questions I have, speaking as somebody who started teaching at Vine when it became a magnet school, I know there was a lot of ruffled feathers in the community about it. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that it was a community school and there were outsiders coming in. I know that in the past decade, and probably before that, there was a big push to make sure that we had community schools, because I know that parents and kids are fierce about their communities. And when you blend them all together, it doesn't always work out. You know, and I'm sure it would kind of settle out through the years. But I also subbed when they closed Vine, and I subbed at Bearden Middle, and it was a disaster. And it wasn't all of the places where some of the kids were bused to, but the tension between the kids there was palpable. I mean, it was hard to sub. It's hard to sub anyway. If y'all tried it, I suggest that you do. But I'm just concerned that those communities are going to lose their identity as community schools. Also had a question, like my colleague, Ms. Templeton, brought up were the magnet schools. Will the other magnet schools, because from what I understand, this will kind of push for the arts and science, STEM, and all that. So what will happen to the other magnet schools, like Vine Magnet as a conglomeration of those three? Sarah Moore Green as the technology, and Green as science and math. What will happen to those schools as far as the transfers coming in? Are they going to lose students? Are they going to lose programming? I'm concerned about those. And speaking for staff, I know that they are very passionate about their community schools as well. I felt very positive about the experience that I had for 22 years at Bell Morris. It was a sweet, small neighborhood school. The kids knew each other. I'm just concerned with 1,000 kids, you know, like I said, the identity, you know, the personalization of that school may be lost. And the staff, would all of the staff from the schools that are closing retain their jobs? I mean, that's a lot of administrators being kind of bumped out of a position. Would they be able to keep their jobs? And the education support personnel, such as teaching assistants, secretaries, nurses, counselors, and such, will they be able to keep their jobs? Because that's a lot of coming together. I have one last one. Can we call it rural elementary or rural K through 8 if it does pass?
So,
for historic.
Thank you, Ms. Fontenot Ridley. Let me work backwards. There is a naming committee, so that's a quick answer. As far as the staff, I'll tell you what it looked like at Mill Creek. When we opened up Mill Creek, you had staff that moved over from Hardin Valley Elementary, Pond Gap, Carnes Elementary. But again, this is a little different situation to where you're moving all of the students and all of the support staff into a new school, right? I'll also say when you increase the numbers, you need additional staff, right? And so I'm pretty confident that you'll get more staff. Now, to administration, I will stay in my lane. That is Dr. Reiswick and Dr. Wilson. I know Dr. Reiswick met with every one of the principals, and I know they've had those conversations. So I will kick that to Dr. Reiswick.
All right, great question. I'll try to tackle a few too, if you don't care. So yeah, we did have that conversation with administration. I think this is important to think through too. When you see that timeline, you guys are making decisions now for that, but it's 3 years out on the bill. So you know, I'll say everything we're saying tonight with, we reserve the right to, you know, modify as time goes along, because you know, for all we know, this whole place may all of a sudden there might be a bunch of houses that go into an area, and we don't know what we're really looking at when it comes time in 3 years to see some of that. So, but yes, so with the conversations we've had with administration, we've got some great administrators in those schools who do a great job leading every day, and we appreciate them being part of this process too. And as I think Dr. Wilson said that best, we're not really in the practice of stopping things that are going really well. So the same thing for these folks. They definitely will have positions with us in Knox County Schools. Now, again, what that looks like, it's been a long time since we've had a K-8. I didn't know that Chill Howe used to be a K-8. I learned that in the last week, so it was kind of cool to hear from someone who went there. So, you know, there's lots of kind of neat things we'll get to do. I know there are some structures that have recently been built in Upper East Tennessee that have that, and the layout and what does that administrative structure look like, all those kinds of things. So to guarantee exactly where everybody will be, or for all we know, some folks may be retired by then, right? So we don't know, but no, I reassured those folks that they will have a job with us for sure. We appreciate what they're doing. And I think Dr. Adams says a good thing about staff too. That would be, we have great staff. And through this, we don't anticipate people losing their job through this. So always when these things happen, some people may want a new endeavor. So we don't want to say, well, you're going to be forced to this new school. They'll have opportunities if there's other schools they'd rather work at in the district to be able to pursue those as well. I did want to hit one thing on programming, if I could. You talked about Vine and Sarah Green. The programs that were mentioned about the integrated arts and then also currently honors, those exist now in Beaumont. So, families can choose any of those programs unless something changed dramatically. I mean, Vine, Sarah Green, all those schools already, have a pretty healthy group of kids transferring there too. So I think, like always, families would have choices to apply for transfers for that, but I don't anticipate these being redundant programs. These are programs that kind of already exist. Let me say one other thing. Well, I got the mic if you don't care, Dr. Adams. So I think too, totally hear the programming, totally hear that, and appreciate, Ms. Templeton, your thought on that. Our staff is not trying to be mysterious about that. We just also know lots of things can happen in 3 years, and we try really hard, and Dr. Adams does this too, never to say anything that's not true. So for us, that's why we haven't brought those kinds of things. Again, I think Dr. Wilson said that well. Why would we discontinue something that typically has a wait list? But at the same time, to commit fully to everything as it is now, 3 years down the road, we might find an honors program that's even stronger, that the community is really excited about in 3 years. So for us I get the need to want to do that, so I understand what you're saying. If the board wants to do it, you guys can do that. But that's part of the reason why we haven't named programming. We've been asked a lot of that too, is we might learn a lot of things in 3 years that actually are better. And I think people want assurance now that what we have is what's going to be. We don't have any problem with what is currently at Beaumont. But we also, our process typically has been name that principal, go through the community engagement, and if all that's still there when we name that person in 2 years, I think we'd be fine for that. And if the board wants to do it now, you guys can do that too. But I just wanted to explain our theory of why we don't, on the front side, name that, just because we didn't want to do that for the future. But I would anticipate that the community would very much want the programming that's there now, and the administration has no problem with that. But that's why I just wanted to explain that we're not trying to be mysterious. We're just trying to make sure we're true to a process. So thank you.
I'll let Ms. Morgan speak and then get back to y'all. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Adams, for your work on this. I know from coming in at the end of the Farragut planning, the Farragut solution, that it's a lot of work. I also have the unique vantage point that when you went through this process with the Farragut community, I was a parent and a community member, and now seeing this presentation for the MLB solution, I'm sitting on the board. And the cool thing about having that perspective is I feel like it's, as the parent and community member, you have this view like you're the passenger on a plane, and I could say what I think is best for the plane, but that's not necessarily going to get us to where we need to go. And you guys have so much more information than what most people know. And I know you guys are stewarding that information well, and I really appreciate that, and you all you and your team doing what is best for kids here. So I think that's fantastic. And also, as the Farragut representative, we have big schools in Farragut, and they're kind of great. So they're fantastic. Kind of great is definitely underselling it. There are a lot of advantages to having big schools. So just to encourage people, not to diminish the loss that may be to communities with saying goodbye to a school and one closing that is near and dear to their hearts. But there are really great things that come with big schools. And, we have got in the primary school alone well over 1,000 K through second graders. And it sounds, when my oldest was going to kindergarten, it sounded incredibly overwhelming to send that sweet little baby to a school with 20 kindergarten classrooms. But there are ways to make big feel small, and Dr. Essex says that about the district a lot. I think that's true in an individual school, along with really great opportunities that can come with a big school. So I think everything sounds fantastic. Thank you guys for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Ms. Fontenot-Ridley?
I didn't turn one of my papers over. I have one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't you. It was me. I didn't get all my papers. There was a question about parental responsibility zones and traffic crossing Western Avenue. And I was wondering if you were going to suspend the parental responsibility zones and have buses that can get the kids across Western Avenue, or is that also something that's coming up in the planning?
Thank you, Ms. Fontenot-Ridley. So the PRZ, that is a board-set policy. We don't have any jurisdiction over that. So that would be a board decision looking at the PRZ.
Because it was brought to my attention that there are a lot of families that have to walk their kids to school, and it would mean crossing over Western Avenue on foot, which I wouldn't do it, so even in my best physical shape.
I do have a follow-up question to that, because I know I sound like a broken record. I would love to get rid of PRZ zones altogether so everybody has bus access. Is there a way that the board could suspend it for one school? Is that a possibility? I may be opening a can of worms, but I would love to see it.
So I will say this.
Because you did say it's a board, and I do understand it is a policy, but I guess the policy would have to be amended to recognize that one school, though, right?
So what I would say is if the board is looking at specific areas within Knox County for suspending the PRZ, the board would have to identify those areas, and then we'd work with transportation so we could communicate the cost. And so the board would have to approve that as well.
Okay.
Sure
I was just curious how that
Yeah,
works.
so I mean, it would be a process, and I'm not saying that we couldn't, because we certainly could do whatever the will of the board is, but it would be a process. We would be creating a process for suspending PRZs in certain areas of Knox County schools.
Okay. I mean, I would like to get rid of them altogether, but that's a larger conversation. Ms. Templeton?
I want to ask you a question about capacity. So based on the projections by the city, this is part of the reason why we're doing this, is to make sure we have all the people taken care of and we have room for them, right? So can you walk me through just the projection of like year over year kind of growth? Like when we open these doors, are we full?
No, we are not.
Okay.
And what I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons we looked at programmatic capacity and max capacity uniquely in every school. So to give you an example, the new school in the town of Farragut, the elementary school that we're building, it will be the largest elementary school that we have built, right? Because we're looking at the projected numbers that they currently have. And so this is no different. When we look at projected numbers for the students within that community, we're using that to drive the number of students that that school would hold.
And currently you are using the transfer numbers in that calculation.
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay. There is one thing that Dr. Reiswick said that I think is important to note about just in the whole magnet conversation, and specifically with arts integration magnet. You make a very good point, and I think it's good policy to rely on the principals on this programming piece. They are the experts in their field. They can see the budget numbers that they are allotted and make really smart decisions, and I trust them to do that. I want to make that very clear. I do think it's within the purview of the board to set a vision for a school. And when you talk about community impact, the Western Heights Transformation program came about because of community feedback. And there will be a makerspace. There will be a Real Good Kitchen incubator space in there. There is arts happening in that Western Heights transformation plan. And I think it's important to note that, and that's another reason why just looking forward to make sure that we're all in alignment with what this community has already set in place and is moving forward with. And that's simply just another reason, because we have that community feedback now, I do think that we can establish it even as a magnet school to make sure that we have that overall community support.
Thank you, Ms. Templeton.
Ms. Elkins, I love it when you speak up.
Thank you. I was just kind of piggyback off what Ms. Templeton said. What do you think the student-teacher ratio will be at this new K-8 school compared to what it is right now? I know growing up, at least at Halls Elementary, Adrian Burnett Elementary, my kindergarten class was probably like 22 to 25 kids, so that's a lot, you know. But I know some schools have smaller ratios, like 12 to 1. And that's something that I think is really important. Like, you get better learning, and I think that, you know, K-8, that's a really important time in someone's life to build a good foundation to be able to produce good work in their adult life.
Thank you, Ms. Elkins. I will go back to what Dr. Reiswick said. When we look at student-to-teacher ratios, we look at a staffing formula. That may significantly change from now until 3 years from now, right? And so Garfield Adams doesn't want to be quoted on student-to-teacher ratio, right? You remember when you said, no, that's 3 years ago. So just to be honest with you, I'm assuming it will change from now to 3 years from now, so I'm not exactly sure what that would look like.
Reverend Butler, I was going to ask you what your
Thank you, Madam
thoughts
Chair.
were.
Well, I wanted to give everyone a chance to ask the questions they had. I've been very close to this for, as Dr. Adams said, for about 2 years, and honestly been very close to it for about 14 years. I pastor a church in Mechanicsville, and in the health condition I'm in now, I can walk to Maynard School on a regular. So our church has adopted the school and been in relationship with them as a community school for over a decade, probably close to 12, 14 years. So we have a heart in the Mechanicsville community. We have a church in Lonsdale as well that I'm a presiding elder over, and so that whole community is important to me and important to the churches I pastor and preside over, as well as the community, and as a board member, seeing the schools as they are. So with all that said, I just really wanted to be clear that so no one will have any doubt, I'm all in on the K-8. I'm all in on where we are right now. I do acknowledge the concerns, and the concerns are real. I do acknowledge those who want to keep small schools and those who want to keep the schools they have. I think that when I watched the presentation that Dr. Adams gave, he gave it pretty much the same way everywhere. Same place 2 times in one day. And so, but one of the things I saw early on is that there was a conflict between a small school and all the things that parents want. Because in the small schools that we have, you can look at the numbers. We don't have those services at those small schools. And the way that we operate now, we will not have those services as long as those schools are small. And our students need those services. So to me, also, is the fact that with the Western transformation, you're going to have an increase, projected 400 students, and that does not include all of the development that will come with that project. So you're going to have 2028, 2029, 400 additional students in that community. So there is a need for a elementary school growth, and there's a need for middle school. I said this 14 years ago, that when a student leaves those 4 elementary schools in the 5th grade, they don't go back to school in their community for the rest of their life. And every district has feeder patterns, but not like that one. So I feel like we need to fix it. I wish we'd fixed it long before now, but here we are. So, but with the concerns and with the things that I've heard, I have not disagreed with those. I just understand in order for us to have what we need, K through 8 is the answer. And I know there's some folk who still going to disagree with that, and I'm comfortable with that because I do have concerns about walkability. Truth be told, there are kids walking across Western, I've been told, to Westview. That's happening now. That's a concern now. There's concerns in other districts I know of that students are having to walk. So walkability is an issue. That's something that we have about 2.5, 3 years to address, asking the city and the county to help with that. And that's part of those communities and those parents who will have that experience. I think there's some other things that's going to be concerns. And but this is the beginning of the process. So all of those things, it's only one thing I think that I heard as a concern that we can address, and that is the issue of a small community school. This K through 8, you won't have a small community school. The proposal calls for Maynard, and I had a funeral of a gentleman who was 77 years old. His high school class, Austin High, came to the funeral, and one of the persons, the president of that, shared some remarks, and they talked about when they were at Maynard School together. And so that's the community. But also, Rural High School is part of the community, so having the Rural High School back is significant. But nothing's going to replace Maynard. Nothing's going to replace Beaumont. Nothing's going to replace Westview, even though there's going to be a preschool there. So those things are real, and I acknowledge that. But for me, looking at everything we've looked at and walking along this journey, I feel like I was led by Dr. Adams and his team. I'm convinced, without any shadow of doubt, that the K through 8 is the best thing for Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and Beaumont. And still having those concerns that are real, but we got to work along the process to plan as best we can to address them and to alleviate as much as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for all that you do. I think your team does such a good job. I know I've said it before, with being creative with solutions that fits the needs of that particular community. And I'm excited about this endeavor. And I'm glad, Reverend Butler, that you spoke up and have been walking along this process the whole time. So I'm excited for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of the board, I will leave you with this. I will say, Dr. Reiswick's team, our senior leadership team, the one thing I can tell you is you see the presentations, we will always bring a presentation that's what's best for kids, period.
Yeah.
Like that is the bottom line, and I'm a very frank individual. Dr. Reiswick has to remind me of that sometimes. And I get real passionate about that. It's very rare that you get an opportunity to do something so special for a community, and this is one of those opportunities that are very rare, and I'm just blessed to be a part of it. And thank you, members of the board, for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. You truly are where you belong, and thank you for sharing your gifts with us. We saw it with the Farragut solution, and now with this, I'm excited. And Ann, your proposal intrigues me. You know, Asheville does this as a district, and every school has a different identity. Like one school could be based on theater, one is an art school. So I love how they do that. I've been wanting to take a field trip over there to see how they do that as a district. And then every school has like these really cool programs built in. So it's intriguing. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we will move. Oh, Miss Christie, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Can I just end on a happy note, Dr. Butler, Dr. Adams? From a community whose feeder pattern looks very different than this, I think the first district will be really happy when this is cleaned up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I'm excited about this discussion.
Your comment kind of prompted, and I've talked with more than one parent about the magnet school consideration, and I echo what I heard from Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Rasvik, and Dr. Adams, and I've had this conversation that we want to keep everything that's good from every school, everything that's good. But we do understand the process, and so it may not be in the board's best interest to set this precedence now to say this is what we're going to have. I think we need to make sure we let the staff go through the process of determining what's best. And I'm hoping and I'm praying and I'm fighting for the magnet component. But I don't think that we as a board should set that, because up to this point, the truth of the matter is it's been data-driven. It's been driven by best practices, community input, and programmatic concerns, programmatic needs. And so I think we need to keep on doing that so that we make sure we're centered on what's best for the student. Now, my thought is I don't have to see how we can come out with not having all those things that we already have and more. But I think we need to make sure we follow our process, and that's my only concern. Although selfishly, I would say, yeah, let's name everything we want, and y'all say we're gonna get it. But I think the process has to be followed appropriately. So that's just my thought.
Oh, no, I completely agree. I'm just glad it was part of the discussion.
But I
like
the idea.
I
do
love,
like the idea, but I just think it's just a process.
I have a process question.
Okay.
Not an argumentative question. Okay. It's a process question. And I guess, Dr. Wilson, this might be for you. At what point in this process would these concerns be brought to light? Would it be before we, and I know, I don't know what page number, but there is a timeline in here somewhere. Is it in the back? Next to the last page. Okay. You've got this thing memorized. Have you seen it more than once?
Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it 8 times.
I've only seen it twice, so so thank you. I appreciate that, Reverend Butler. So to meet my concerns, Dr. Wilson, at what point would it come to a conversation, and would it ever come in front of the board, or would there ever be a moment in time that this would be considered to be a magnet school with a focus?
Yeah. So I would say a couple things, and Dr. Adams may have to weigh in a little bit on the design and construction side of the equation. When you're talking about programmatic aspects of a school, certainly there are building and design components to that as well. So when you look at even in that 25-26 space, and we start to think about the building itself, if there were, spaces allocated for certain things like that, that would be indicative of a programming, decision. Certainly those would be parts of that discussion. I think when you start to get down to like real specifics that are going to require maybe some additional input and things like that, you're probably getting closer to that window where you're hiring the principal, which is probably that 27-28 school year, in terms of like the real deep discussions on those things. But even earlier on in that building and design phase, where you could start to hint at what is to come, certainly those types of things come to the board when we're looking at schematics and things like that. So I don't know if you would add to that, Dr. Adams.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. No, to Dr. Wilson's point, the schematic design does come before the board. So that does give us an opportunity to revisit any programs within the building that you all feel need a unique design. And so after the schematic design goes before the board, that is where they move forward with the rest of the design and the draft, and then they'll bring that back. So that gives an opportunity to really address programmings within the building.
Well, and I do understand that principals by nature are creative people. Beaumont was built in 1920. That's my guess. I got to be close. And it's one of the most successful magnet schools in Knox County, because there have been principals that have embraced it and made this building work. And there's been a PTA that has raised the money to make that theater happen. But it's those magnet funds that have helped that Encore staff stay on. And that's the important piece of it. And I understand that you guys are classifying that in this conversation as programmatic. I'm seeing it more as a vision casting on the front end, is how I'm perceiving this piece of it. Yep, nope,
If I could just weigh in real quick.
please do.
I think we're saying very similar things.
Okay.
I think you're committing a little further than we were ready to go. So I don't foresee that we're going to move away from that programming. And I sense you're saying, well, let's go ahead and nail it down. I think the challenge on the 3 years. Here's a for instance. Currently, the honors program isn't tied to any external standard, right? So it's currently a Knox County honor school. And so like that doesn't mean anything unless you're in Knox County, right? It could be worth exploring. Do we want to make that something that's more nationally, internationally, whatever, like recognized? And that would take probably something like a principal in and community input and all those kinds of things. But I think ultimately we want to make sure if we're saying there's an honors academy, there's probably a performance expectation that's performing with the top schools, all those kinds of things that are there. And there could be some standards that we could see from a program. So I think that's why not nailing all that down. There may be something like that even in the performing arts. I don't know. Like I don't have that knowledge. It'd be something worth researching and us kind of looking at. I don't think any of us are saying we want it to be something different. I think it's just vision-wise, we do believe in the choice part. We do think families are choosing that, and we do think these are really good programs. We probably would just want to say, let's go through the motions to see if there is even better, or I like the way you just said that, Reverend Butler, about like, let's be better, you know? So I don't think it's like, let's move in a different direction or let's do something different. I think our thought on the staff is just let the process play a little bit and see if there is a way we can improve on it. It's not to move away from what's currently there. So, but I get it. There's also things like, that's great. That's 3 years out and tonight's tonight and people are going, I want to know now. So I totally get that. And if the board wants to go there, like Dr. Adams said, we'll go there. I mean, we're not strongly opposed. I think that's why you haven't, I was trying to explain why you haven't seen that come from the staff is I think we always look at everything for a continuous improvement to go, are there things we could enhance or make better? But I don't think anyone's saying we don't think these programs should exist in this new school. We also have multiple schools combining potentially into this place too, and we want to see the flavor and feel for everybody when we do that. So it's not a lack of commitment to want to do it. It's more, again, part of the process. So I'm not arguing we don't want to go there. So I don't want you to think I'm arguing with you that we don't want it.
I really appreciate this discussion. This was awesome. Thank you for these different perspectives and things to think about. I'm excited.